April 5, 1242. Lake Peipus, a vast white expanse of ice stretching toward the horizon, separating two worlds. To the west, the steel-clad expansion of the Teutonic Order, the vanguard of the Northern Crusades. To the east, the Novgorod Republic, led by a 21-year-old Prince Alexander Nevsky, defending the last gateway to the Russian heartland. Most people know this story through the lens of cinematic legend, the dramatic image of heavy knights crashing through the ice. However, the historical reality is far more complex and strategically fascinating. It was a collision of two different military philosophies, where the environment itself was weaponized. To understand the battle, we must strip away the drama and analyze the cold, hard technicalities of the Battle of Lake Peipus. To grasp the magnitude of the conflict, we must first look at the 13th century map. The Teutonic Order was not merely a group of militant monks, they were a sovereign military powerhouse. Having consolidated power in Prussia and Livonia through decades of warfare, their goal was the expansion of Latin Christendom through territorial acquisition. By the 1240s, they were the most sophisticated military machine in Northern Europe. Novgorod, meanwhile, was in a desperate position. The Mongol Empire had already devastated the southern Russian principalities. Novgorod was one of the few wealthy, independent centers left, surviving through its control of the Baltic trade routes. If the Teutonic Knights took Novgorod, the northern trade would collapse, and the Orthodox faith in the region would be erased. In 1240, the Knights took Pskov. By early 1242, Alexander Nevsky had retaken it, but the main force of the Livonian branch of the Teutonic Order was mobilizing for a decisive counterstrike. Let us examine the combatants. Both sides were professional warriors, but their equipment and tactical doctrines differed. The core of the Crusader army was the Livonian Order. These were elite heavy cavalry. A brother knight was encased in a full hauberk of mail, often with early forms of plate reinforcements. They wore the iconic great helm, which offered excellent protection, but severely limited peripheral vision. Their primary weapon was the heavy lance, used in a couch position for a devastating shock charge. Accompanying these knights were Danish vassals and the Chud, local Baltic tribesmen who served as light infantry. The total strength of this force is estimated between 2,000 and 3,000 men. The Novgorodian army was more diverse. Its core was Nevsky's družina, professional heavy cavalry equipped similarly to the Western Knights, but with more Eastern and Byzantine influences. They often wore lamellar armor, which offered better mobility than full mail. Below them was the Polk, the city militia of Novgorod, composed of free citizens equipped with axes, spears, and large shields. Crucially, Nevsky also employed significant numbers of archers, a tactical element the Western Knights were not prepared to counter. The Novgorodian strength is estimated at 4,000 to 5,000 men. The tactical problem for Nevsky was the Boar's Head, Schweinskopf. This was a deep, narrow wedge formation of armored knights. It was designed to pierce the center of any infantry line like a diamond-tipped drill. Once the point of the wedge broke the enemy's formation, the infantry following closely behind would expand into the gap. Nevsky knew his infantry could not withstand a direct charge of this magnitude on open ground. He needed a location that would limit the knight's mobility and allow him to dictate the terms of the engagement. He chose his ground at Raven's Rock, on the eastern shore of Lake Peipus. By positioning his army on the frozen lake near the shore, he controlled the angle of the engagement. The Crusaders had to cross a vast, exposed surface to reach him. The ice was thick enough to support horses, but it was a treacherous surface for a heavy charge. More importantly, Nevsky used the geography of the shoreline to anchor his flanks. The knights couldn't outflank him, they were funneled into hitting his center. The battle began at dawn on April 5th, 1242. As the sun rose, the crusader wedge began its heavy trot across the ice, gradually accelerating into a gallop. The sound would have been terrifying. Hundreds of tons of steel and horseflesh thundering across a frozen drum. The wedge slammed into the Novgorodian center with horrific force. As expected, the ironclad knights pierced the front ranks of the city militia. To an observer, it appeared the Novgorodian line was collapsing. But this was the pivot point of Nevsky's trap. As the crusader wedge drove deeper, it began to lose its momentum. The soft center of the militia didn't break. They retreated slowly, drawing the knights into a pocket. Once the knights were deep enough, the militia used hooks and long spears to pull riders from their saddles. On the slippery ice, a knight who lost his horse became immobile. While the center held on with grim determination, Nevsky released his tactical reserve, his heavy cavalry wings. The družina slammed into the exposed flanks of the wedge. The crusader formation was designed for forward momentum. It had no mechanism to pivot and face a heavy attack from the sides while its front was still engaged. The boar's head was no longer a piercing weapon. It was an anvil being struck from three sides. The knights were now physically packed so tightly together that they could barely swing their swords. The ice was now a slaughterhouse floor where their weight and armor became their greatest enemies. Now, we must address the most enduring legend. Did the ice actually break? Contemporary chronicles describe a bloody pursuit across the ice for 7 miles. However, they do not emphasize the ice breaking as the primary cause of the defeat. In the 13th century, if an entire army had drowned, chroniclers would have hailed it as a divine miracle. Instead, they focused on the sheer number of men cut down in the retreat. In reality, most casualties occurred during the slaughter on the ice, the phase where the crusader formation broke and individual knights tried to flee. Nevsky's light cavalry hunted them down across the frozen expanse. However, modern hydrological studies provide a technical footnote. In early April, the ice on the lake is not uniform. Certain areas, particularly near the 𝐍𝐞𝐯𝐿𝐬𝐿 current, are significantly thinner due to thermal springs. It is highly probable that during the panicked retreat, many knights veered off the safe paths and fell through. The weight of a knight in full gear would easily surpass the load-bearing capacity of spring ice. Thus, the breaking ice was a real event, but it was the final punctuation mark of a tactical failure, not the cause of the defeat itself. The aftermath of the battle was a geopolitical shift. The Teutonic Order lost approximately 20 brother knights killed and several captured. While this number sounds small, a brother knight was a high-ranking officer. The loss was a devastating blow to the leadership. Hundreds of secondary troops were also lost. For the Order, the defeat halted their eastward expansion for centuries. They shifted their focus to consolidating their hold on the Baltic tribes, effectively ending the dream of a crusader state in Russia. For Alexander Nevsky, the battle was a masterpiece of asymmetric warfare. He successfully neutralized the most powerful tactical formation of his era by using the environment as a force multiplier. He understood that on the ice, the heavy soldier is the vulnerable soldier. He traded space for time, and time for the perfect opportunity to strike. The technical brilliance of Nevsky's plan lay in his understanding of friction and density. By forcing the knights into a dense mass, he negated their ability to use their lances. By fighting on ice, he ensured that any loss of balance was fatal. The battle lasted most of the day, turning the white surface of the lake into a dark, frozen mire of blood and iron. The psychological impact on the Crusaders was profound. They had been defeated not by a superior technological force, but by a commander who integrated the landscape into his order of battle. This was not a victory of numbers, but a victory of positioning. In the centuries following, the battle on the ice was heavily mythologized, especially during times of national crisis. But when we look at the raw data, the troop movements, the gear specifications, and the hydrological state of Lake Peipus in April, we see a story of cold, calculated military science. Nevsky didn't rely on luck or a miracle. He relied on the weight of his enemy's armor and the physics of spring ice. He turned the knights' greatest asset, their heavy steel, into their primary cause of death. The battle remains a cornerstone of military history because it demonstrates that technology is only as effective as the terrain allows. The Teutonic Knights had better armor, but Nevsky had better situational awareness. He realized that the landscape is not just a stage for a battle, it is a weapon to be used. History is rarely as clean as the movies suggest. There were no epic speeches, just the guttural sounds of men fighting for survival and the terrifying low-frequency groan of shifting ice. But on that April morning, the environment was the ultimate arbiter. The death trap wasn't just a metaphor. It was a physical reality created by a commander who knew his land and his enemy better than they knew themselves. The frozen slaughter of the Teutonic Knights stands as a timeless lesson in tactical adaptation and the unforgiving nature of the elements. It remains a testament to how a smaller, more adaptable force can dismantle a heavy, rigid superpower through the intelligent application of environmental pressure.